The people who are supposed to love you the most can sometimes become the ones who teach you what loneliness really feels like. I never imagined those words would become the story of my life until the night my own family locked the front door behind me and pretended I no longer existed. The November wind cut through my thin sweater as I stood on the porch with one worn suitcase beside my feet, staring at the house where I had spent 24 years trying to earn a place that had never truly been mine. Warm light spilled through the living room windows. I could hear laughter inside, followed by the familiar clink of dinner plates. They had already moved on as if I had never been part of the family at all. My name is Emily Carter, and if you had met me a week earlier, you probably would have thought I had a normal life. I worked long shifts at a neighborhood bakery outside Boston, paid my share of the bills, drove my late grandmother to doctor's appointments before she passed away, and somehow still found time to help my younger brother whenever he needed money or a ride across town. I kept believing that if I gave enough, loved enough, and sacrificed enough, one day they would finally look at me the way families are supposed to look at each other. Instead, they looked through me. Earlier that evening, my father calmly announced that my room was needed for my brother and his fiancée because they were expecting a baby. My mother avoided my eyes while folding kitchen towels that didn't need folding. My brother thanked them with a smile, but never once looked in my direction. When I quietly asked where I was supposed to go, my father simply shrugged and told me I was an adult now, that it was time to figure life out on my own. No shouting, no dramatic argument. Somehow the silence hurt even more. I packed everything I owned into one suitcase and one faded backpack. Nobody offered to help. Nobody asked if I had enough money for a motel or enough gas to reach another city. As I stepped onto the porch, my mother finally spoke. She didn't tell me she loved me. She only reminded me to leave my house key on the kitchen counter. 30 seconds later, I heard the deadbolt click. That tiny metallic sound echoed louder than any slammed door ever could. I stood there for what felt like forever before picking up my suitcase and walking toward the sidewalk. My old sedan had refused to start that morning, and I couldn't afford the repairs, so my feet became my only transportation. The streets blurred beneath the cold drizzle while passing cars sprayed water across the curb. Couples hurried into coffee shops. Families loaded groceries into SUVs. The whole city seemed wrapped in ordinary happiness while I carried everything I owned through the rain. I kept telling myself not to cry because crying would make this real. But somewhere between the third traffic light and the empty bus stop, my vision blurred anyway. I sat down on the cold bench, wrapped my arms around my suitcase, and whispered the only question I had left. If my own family didn't want me, where in the world did I belong? The rain grew heavier with every passing minute until the city lights dissolved into shimmering streaks across the wet pavement. I pulled my sweater tighter around my shoulders, but the cold had already settled deep inside me somewhere no fabric could reach. The bus stop offered little protection from the wind, and after almost an hour, only 2 buses had passed. Neither one was heading anywhere I could afford to go. I checked the balance on my phone for what had to be the 10th time. $38.16. That was everything I had left after paying my share of bills only 3 days earlier, believing I was investing in a home that would always have room for me. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. Home. It was amazing how one word could suddenly feel like it belonged to someone else. My stomach reminded me that I had skipped dinner. The smell of fresh pizza drifted from a restaurant across the street where families gathered beneath warm lights and holiday decorations that had already begun appearing before Thanksgiving. Children laughed while parents carried oversized takeout boxes toward waiting cars. I looked away before envy had the chance to become resentment. I never wanted someone else's life. I had only wanted my own family to choose me at least once. A pair of headlights appeared through the rain, moving slowly instead of rushing like everyone else. A black SUV rolled toward the curb several yards away before stopping without a sound. It was the kind of vehicle that looked expensive even under gray skies, polished despite the weather, with dark windows reflecting the streetlights like mirrors. I barely noticed it at first. Wealthy people did not usually pay attention to women sitting alone at empty bus stops after 9 o'clock. I lowered my eyes and focused on rubbing warmth back into my fingers. The passenger door never opened. Neither did the rear door. Instead, after several quiet seconds, the driver's door swung open. A tall man stepped out wearing a charcoal overcoat that fit him perfectly. Even from where I sat, I could tell he carried himself differently from anyone I had ever met. There was no rush in his movements, no need to prove anything to the world around him. He simply walked through the rain as though it respected him enough to stay out of his way. He stopped several feet from the bench, careful not to invade my space. His expression remained calm, his green eyes studying me with quiet concern instead of curiosity. "Miss," he said, his voice deep but unexpectedly gentle. "You have been sitting here for a long time." I instinctively tightened my grip on my suitcase. "I am fine," I answered automatically, even though nothing about me looked fine anymore. His gaze drifted toward the suitcase, then back to my face. He did not ask uncomfortable questions. He did not offer pity. Instead, he slowly removed the wool scarf from around his neck and held it toward me. "You are freezing," he said simply. I hesitated. Nobody had offered me kindness all day. The simple gesture felt so unfamiliar that I almost forgot how to accept it. Before I could find the right words, another gust of icy wind swept across the sidewalk, and my body shivered hard enough to betray me. For the first time that terrible night, the stranger's composed expression softened ever so slightly, and something inside me whispered that perhaps fate had not finished writing my story after all. I stared at the scarf in his outstretched hand for several long seconds, convinced there had to be a reason behind such unexpected kindness. People did not simply stop for strangers anymore. Not in the middle of a cold November night. Not for someone carrying an old suitcase and wearing the exhausted expression of a woman who had clearly run out of places to go. "I cannot take this," I whispered, embarrassed by how weak my voice sounded. The man did not pull the scarf back. Instead, he offered the smallest hint of a smile. "Then consider it a loan until you are warm again." Something about the way he spoke settled the panic that had been building inside my chest for hours. There was confidence in his voice, but not arrogance. Authority, but not intimidation. After another moment of hesitation, I slowly accepted the scarf. It smelled faintly of cedarwood and fresh winter air. The soft fabric wrapped around my neck carried more warmth than I had expected, and for the first time that evening, I felt my shoulders relax. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded once, as if gratitude required no further conversation. "My name is Vincent." He did not offer a last name, and I was too emotionally exhausted to ask for one. "Emily," I replied. The rain continued falling between us until he glanced toward the nearly empty street. "There will not be another bus for at least 40 minutes, he said. I looked at the electronic schedule across the road and realized he was right. "I know," I answered. "I am still deciding where I should go." The words escaped before I could stop them. Vincent looked at me carefully, not with pity, but with the quiet attention of someone listening to something important. "Do you have anyone expecting you tonight?" I swallowed hard before shaking my head. Saying no out loud somehow made the truth impossible to deny. He remained silent for several seconds, respecting the weight of that answer. Then he spoke with the same calm certainty that had marked every word since stepping out of the vehicle. "There is a guest house on my property. It is empty. You can stay there tonight. No obligations. No questions you do not wish to answer. Tomorrow morning, if you decide to leave, one of my drivers will take you anywhere within 100 miles. Every instinct told me to be careful. My parents had raised me to distrust offers that seemed too generous, even if they had forgotten every lesson they once tried to teach. Yet something about Vincent felt different. He had not pressured me. He had not stepped closer than necessary. He had not treated me like someone who owed him gratitude simply because he had noticed I existed. I looked at the rain soaking the sidewalk, then at my suitcase, then back toward the warm interior of the black sport utility vehicle. "Why would you help someone you have never met?" I finally asked. His eyes drifted toward the busy intersection where strangers hurried past without ever looking at one another. "Because everyone deserves at least one place where they do not have to earn the right to rest." The answer settled into my heart with surprising force. Tears threatened again, but this time they came from something I had almost forgotten could exist. Hope. Vincent walked toward the passenger side and opened the door himself before stepping back to give me space to decide. No impatience crossed his face. No expectation. The choice belonged entirely to me. I took one slow breath, lifted my worn suitcase from the wet sidewalk, and climbed into the warm vehicle, unaware that the single decision I made that rainy night was quietly carrying me toward a life I never believed someone like me could deserve. The drive lasted longer than I expected, yet neither of us seemed to mind the silence. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the city slowly gave way to quiet neighborhoods, tree-lined roads, and eventually a pair of elegant wrought iron gates that opened before our vehicle without Vincent saying a single word. I stared through the windshield as we followed a winding driveway illuminated by warm lanterns instead of harsh security lights. The estate that appeared beyond the trees looked less like a mansion and more like something from an old American magazine featuring historic homes. It was grand without feeling cold, impressive without trying to intimidate anyone. The sport utility vehicle came to a smooth stop beneath a covered entrance where two staff members were already waiting with umbrellas. They greeted Vincent respectfully before turning toward me with the same quiet courtesy. Not curiosity, not judgment. Courtesy. One of them smiled gently. "Welcome, Miss Carter." I blinked in surprise. Nobody had called me Miss Carter in years. At the bakery, I was simply Emily. At home, I was usually interrupted before anyone even finished saying my name. Hearing those two simple words made something ache inside my chest. Vincent noticed my hesitation, but said nothing. He simply gestured toward the front door, allowing me to walk ahead instead of following behind him. The entrance hall glowed beneath soft golden lighting. Polished hardwood floors reflected the warmth of the fireplaces burning somewhere deeper inside the house. Fresh flowers decorated tables near the staircase, filling the air with the faint scent of lilies instead of expensive perfume. Everything felt peaceful, carefully maintained, alive. A woman in her 60s approached with silver hair neatly pinned back and kind blue eyes that reminded me of my grandmother. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti," she said before turning toward me. "I have prepared the East Guest House, just as requested." Guest House. The words caught me off guard. Vincent had been telling the truth all along. He had never intended to place me inside the main residence or make me feel trapped beneath someone else's roof. He had already planned to give me privacy before I had even accepted his offer. "Thank you, Margaret," Vincent replied. "Please make sure Miss Carter has everything she needs for the night." Margaret smiled warmly. "Of course." She led me along a stone pathway lit by small garden lights toward a charming cottage overlooking a quiet lake at the edge of the property. It was larger than the apartment I had grown up in. Inside, a fire crackled gently in the living room fireplace. Fresh towels rested neatly beside the bathroom door. A kettle sat beside an assortment of tea bags, and a handwritten note on the kitchen counter simply read, "Welcome. Make yourself comfortable." I turned slowly, unable to believe any of it was real. "There must be some mistake," I whispered. "People like me do not stay in places like this." Margaret's expression softened. "Mr. Moretti does not decide who deserves kindness by looking at a person's bank account." Before leaving, she paused at the doorway. "Breakfast will be ready whenever you wake up. There is no schedule here tonight except the one your heart needs." After she quietly closed the door behind her, the cottage became perfectly still. I placed my worn suitcase beside an elegant sofa, noticing how small and weathered it looked against everything around it. For the first time since leaving my family home, I allowed myself to breathe without waiting for someone to criticize the way I did it. Outside, the rain finally began to fade, and as I looked across the peaceful water shimmering beneath the moonlight, I realized something extraordinary had happened. Someone had given me shelter without asking me to prove that I was worthy of receiving it. I woke to the sound of birds instead of arguments. For several peaceful seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I opened my eyes and saw sunlight spilling through tall windows, painting soft golden patterns across the hardwood floor. The blanket wrapped around me felt warmer than any I had owned before, yet it was not the comfort of expensive fabric that caught me by surprise. It was the silence. No raised voices. No footsteps pacing outside my bedroom door. No one reminding me that I was a burden. Just quiet. I slowly sat up, half expecting someone to tell me I had overstayed my welcome. Instead, I found a folded set of new clothes resting on a chair beside the fireplace. A simple cream sweater, dark blue jeans, warm socks, and a handwritten card. There was no signature, only a short message. I thought these might fit. "Wear whatever makes you comfortable. Breakfast whenever you are ready." I stared at the card for a long moment. The words were so ordinary, yet they carried a kindness that felt almost impossible to accept. Nobody had asked what made me comfortable in years. After getting dressed, I stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The lake reflected a cloudless, sky while fallen autumn leaves floated gently across the water. Somewhere nearby, I heard laughter from gardeners exchanging friendly conversation as they worked. The entire property felt calm, as though everyone understood that peace was something worth protecting. Margaret greeted me at the cottage door with a welcoming smile. "Good morning, Miss Carter. I hope you slept well." I nodded, almost embarrassed. "Better than I have in a very long time." She seemed genuinely happy to hear that. We walked toward the main house together, and the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon drifted through the hallways. The dining room overlooked the gardens through wide windows, filling the room with natural light. A simple breakfast waited on the table. Fresh fruit, scrambled eggs, toast, oatmeal, and hot coffee. Nothing extravagant, just thoughtful. Vincent was already seated with a newspaper folded beside his plate. When I entered, he stood immediately, not because he had to, because he chose to. "Good morning, Emily," he said. "Did you sleep well?" Such an ordinary question. Yet nobody in my family had asked me that in years. I felt my throat tighten before quietly answering, "Yes. Thank you." He motioned toward the empty chair across from him. "Please eat while everything is still warm." There were no uncomfortable questions about my past. No expectation that I explain every painful detail of my life. Instead, we spoke about simple things. The weather, the bakery where I worked, my grandmother's love of gardening. I found myself smiling without realizing it. At one point I reached for my coffee, only for Vincent to notice that the mug had grown cold while we talked. Without interrupting the conversation, he poured a fresh cup and gently slid it toward me. The gesture lasted only a few seconds, but something inside me shifted. My family had always expected me to notice everyone else's needs first. This was the first time I could remember someone quietly noticing mine. After breakfast, I insisted on helping clear the table, but Margaret laughed softly before shaking her head. "Today," she said kindly, "your only responsibility is to breathe, rest, and remember that being cared for does not make you a burden." I looked toward Vincent, expecting him to disagree or politely correct her. Instead, he simply met my eyes with the same calm expression I had seen at the bus stop. "Everyone deserves at least one morning where they are allowed to believe tomorrow can be better than yesterday," he said. As those words settled into the quiet room, I realized I had spent my entire life trying to earn love. Somehow, in less than 24 hours, a complete stranger had begun teaching me that genuine kindness was never supposed to be earned in the first place. 3 peaceful days passed before the past remembered where to find me. I spent those mornings walking beside the lake, helping Margaret arrange flowers in the garden, and reading books that had been waiting on the shelves of the guest house for someone willing to slow down long enough to enjoy them. Every evening ended the same way. Vincent would ask whether I had eaten enough, whether I needed anything, and whether I was sleeping better. He never asked me to stay. He never hinted that I owed him anything. Somehow that made it even harder to imagine leaving. On the 4th afternoon, I was sitting on the porch with a cup of hot tea when I noticed several unfamiliar vehicles approaching through the front gates. The atmosphere shifted almost immediately. Staff members remained calm, but I could sense quiet conversations moving through the property like ripples across the lake. Margaret stepped outside and offered me a reassuring smile. "Please do not worry. Everything is under control." I set my cup down. "Is something wrong?" Before she could answer, I recognized the old pickup truck pulling in behind the other vehicles. My father's truck. My heartbeat stumbled. The passenger door opened first, and my younger brother climbed out wearing the same confident expression he always carried whenever he believed someone else would solve his problems. My mother followed slowly, adjusting her purse before looking toward the house. My father remained near the truck with his arms folded, glancing around the estate with poorly hidden amazement. None of them looked frightened. None of them looked relieved that I was safe. They looked impressed. Margaret quietly touched my arm. "Would you like to go back inside?" I almost said yes. Instead, I shook my head. For too many years I had hidden from difficult conversations simply to keep peace that never truly existed. Vincent stepped out onto the front terrace at that exact moment, dressed in a navy suit that somehow made calm look powerful. He walked toward the driveway with the same steady confidence I had come to recognize. There was no anger in his expression, only quiet control. My father approached first and forced an awkward smile. "You must be Mr. Moretti. We came to bring Emily home." Vincent listened without interrupting. Then he looked toward me instead of answering them. "Emily," he said gently, Would you like to go home with your family? The question caught me completely off guard. He was giving me the choice. My choice. Nobody answered for me. Nobody decided what was best for me before I could speak. My mother finally stepped forward. Sweetheart, we were worried about you. The words sounded rehearsed, and something inside me quietly recognized the difference between concern and convenience. If they had truly been worried, they would have looked for me before discovering where I was. My brother glanced toward the elegant house behind Vincent. This place is incredible, he said with an impressed whistle. You really landed on your feet. I looked from one familiar face to another and realized something painful. They had not come because they missed their daughter or sister. They had come because they had discovered where she had been sleeping. Vincent remained silent beside me, never once attempting to influence my decision. His confidence in my ability to choose for myself gave me more strength than any speech ever could. I took one slow breath, met my family's eyes, and for the first time in my life, I answered without apologizing. I am exactly where I need to be right now. The silence that followed my answer felt strangely peaceful. My father looked at me as though I had spoken a language he no longer understood. My mother forced another smile that never reached her eyes, while my brother shifted his attention from me back to the estate behind Vincent, quietly admiring the luxury surrounding him. It became painfully obvious that they were more interested in where I was living than how I had survived the night they sent me away. Emily, my mother began softly. Families make mistakes. We all said things we did not mean. I searched her face, hoping to find even the smallest trace of regret. Instead, I found calculation. The same expression she wore whenever she wanted someone to forgive her without ever acknowledging the damage she had caused. Before I could answer, my brother stepped closer with an awkward laugh. Come on, Em. Everybody overreacted. Dad was under a lot of stress. You know how things have been lately. I almost smiled, not because his words comforted me, but because I finally recognized a pattern I had ignored my entire life. Every painful memory had always come wrapped inside someone else's excuse. My feelings had always been postponed until everyone else felt better. Vincent remained beside me without saying a single word. He did not interrupt. He did not defend me. Somehow his silence made me feel stronger than any argument could have. My father finally cleared his throat. Mr. Moretti, I appreciate everything you have done for our daughter. We can take it from here. Vincent's expression never changed. I am afraid that decision does not belong to either of us. His voice remained calm and respectful. Miss Carter is an adult. She has already answered your question. My father frowned, clearly unaccustomed to hearing someone refuse him so politely. This is a private family matter. Vincent nodded once. Then I believe it should remain her choice. There was no anger in his tone, no raised voice. Yet the conversation ended there because everyone understood he meant every word. My mother suddenly looked at me with unexpected warmth. Emily, sweetheart, if money is the reason you are staying here, we can work something out. The sentence struck me harder than anything else she had said, not because it was cruel, but because it revealed what she truly believed. She assumed I had traded my dignity for comfort because that was how she measured the world. I slowly shook my head. I stayed because someone here treated me with respect before they knew anything about me. My voice trembled, but I did not look away. Do you know what Vincent asked me on my first morning here? They remained silent. He asked if I had slept well. Tears blurred my vision as I smiled through them. It sounds like such a small question, but nobody in my own family had asked me that in years. My brother lowered his eyes. My mother opened her mouth, but found no words. Even my father looked away toward the lake. For the first time, they were not facing the daughter who had always apologized. They were standing before a woman who had finally discovered that kindness should never feel unusual. As they slowly returned to their truck, Vincent quietly walked beside me toward the garden without watching them leave. Are you all right? He asked. I looked across the calm water where autumn leaves drifted without resistance and realized the answer surprised even me. I think, I whispered, breathing more freely than I had in years. I finally am. Life settled into a gentle rhythm after my family left. But peace has a strange way of revealing truths you never expected to find. A week later, I was walking through the gardens with Margaret when two black sedans quietly arrived at the estate. Several men in dark suits stepped out, greeting Vincent with unmistakable respect before following him into the main house. Their expressions were serious, yet every movement reflected discipline instead of fear. Curiosity lingered in the back of my mind, but I reminded myself that everyone deserved privacy, especially someone who had shown me so much kindness without asking for anything in return. Later that afternoon, I wandered into the library, searching for a novel Margaret had recommended. As I reached for a book on the highest shelf, I noticed a newspaper folded neatly on a nearby table. A photograph caught my attention before I could look away. It was Vincent. The headline described him as one of the most influential businessmen on the East Coast, but the article also mentioned whispers that had followed his family name. For decades, powerful alliances, private security, quiet influence, rumors connecting the Moretti family to an organized crime legacy that had never been proven. My heart skipped a beat. I read the paragraph twice, hoping I had misunderstood it. When I looked up, Vincent was standing quietly in the doorway. He did not seem surprised that I had found the article. He walked into the room with his usual calm expression and gently closed the book I was still holding. "You deserve the truth," he said. I searched his face, waiting for fear to appear, but all I saw was honesty. "There are many stories about my family," he continued. "Some are true, some are exaggerated. What matters is the life I choose to live today." I struggled to find the right words. "Are you dangerous?" The question escaped before I could soften it. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked through the library window toward the gardens where Margaret was helping a young groundskeeper plant winter flowers. "Danger exists in every city," he said quietly. "The only question that has ever mattered to me is who I choose to protect from it." Before I could respond, voices echoed from the front entrance. A woman carrying a frightened little girl had arrived unexpectedly. Their car had broken down several miles away, and the child had twisted her ankle while walking along the roadside. Without hesitation, Vincent excused himself and crossed the foyer. He knelt until he was eye level with the little girl, speaking so gently that her frightened tears slowly faded into shy smiles. He asked Margaret to prepare hot chocolate while arranging for one of the estate physicians to examine her ankle and one of his drivers to repair the family's vehicle. Nobody asked for payment. Nobody expected gratitude. They simply helped because someone needed help. I watched quietly from the staircase as the little girl wrapped her tiny arms around Vincent before leaving that evening. He smiled with genuine warmth, the same quiet smile he had offered me at the bus stop. In that moment, the newspaper article lost its power over my thoughts. People could write endless stories about influence, wealth, or whispered rumors. But none of those pages had been standing in the rain offering a scarf to a stranger with nowhere to go. None of them had asked whether I had slept well. None of them had shown compassion when nobody was watching. As the front door closed behind the grateful family, I finally understood that a person's reputation might fill headlines, but their character was revealed in the small moments that never appeared in print. 6 months later, I stood on the front porch of a small white house overlooking a quiet lake just beyond the Moretti estate, holding a simple brass key that rested in the palm of my hand. Morning sunlight shimmered across the water while a cool spring breeze carried the scent of blooming dogwoods through the yard. The house was not enormous. It did not need to be. It had a welcoming front porch with 2 rocking chairs, a kitchen filled with natural light, shelves waiting for books, and a garden that Margaret insisted would soon become my favorite place in the world. Vincent stood beside me with his hands in the pockets of his jacket, watching my expression instead of the house. "It belongs to you," he said quietly. I looked at him in disbelief. "I cannot accept something like this." He smiled with the same calm warmth I had come to know from the rainy night we first met. "It is not a reward, Emily. It is a beginning. Every person deserves a place where they feel safe enough to become who they were always meant to be." I closed my fingers around the key, and for a long moment I could not speak. A year earlier, I had believed that home was a place someone else allowed you to stay. Standing there, I finally understood that home was the place where your heart no longer had to ask permission to exist. During those months, I had returned to the bakery, enrolled in evening business classes, with Vincent quietly encouraging every dream I had once considered impossible, and slowly rebuilt a life based on confidence instead of fear. Margaret became the family I thought I had lost forever. The staff greeted me every morning with genuine smiles that never asked me to prove my worth. Even Vincent, despite the responsibilities that constantly demanded his attention, never forgot the little things. Some mornings he left fresh coffee outside my cottage before sunrise. Other days he simply asked whether I had been reading anything interesting lately. Those ordinary moments healed wounds that grand gestures never could. My family tried reaching out several more times. There were phone calls, letters, even holiday invitations filled with promises that everything would be different. I chose forgiveness because carrying bitterness would only chain me to the past. But forgiveness did not require me to return to the place where I had forgotten my own value. Sometimes the greatest act of love is quietly protecting the peace you fought so hard to find. As the afternoon sun settled over the lake, Vincent handed me a small wooden box. Inside rested the wool scarf he had offered me at the bus stop on the night we met, carefully cleaned and folded. I laughed softly through unexpected tears. "I forgot to return your loan." He gently shook his head. "It was never a loan." My eyes filled as I traced the familiar fabric between my fingers. That scarf had not simply kept me warm. It had carried me across the invisible bridge between loneliness and belonging. I looked around at the quiet house, the blooming garden, the peaceful water, and the people who had chosen kindness without expecting anything in return. Then I finally understood something that had taken me 24 years to learn. Being abandoned did not define my future. It only led me toward the people who would teach me what family truly meant. Because in the end, love is never measured by who shares your last name. It is measured by who quietly stays when the rest of the world walks away.